Today, we are among State Teacher of the Year royalty. We have with us the great honor of hosting Sarah Brown Wessling, who is the 2010 National Teacher of the Year. That is no joke, people, no joke. National Teacher of the Year. She is a 23-year veteran of high school English classroom and a former teacher laureate for the Teaching Channel. She's nationally board certified since 2005 and serves as the vice chair for the National Board NBPTS Executive Board. She's a frequent speaker and facilitator of professional learning around the country and an avid blogger and writer. As an English teacher, of course, she would be an avid writer. Currently, she's also serving as the senior advisor for the National Teacher of the Year program, which she has worked with for the past 11 years as a facilitator, designer of professional learning, and consultant. Sarah is the author of Supporting Students in a Time of Core Standards and maintains a website at sarahbrownwessling.com. She is, most importantly, mom to Evan, Lauren, and Zachary, who keep her grounded and laughing. She works full-time from Des Moines, Iowa, so she's in some cold weather out there too. So follow Sarah on Twitter at Sarah B. Wessling and on Instagram at Sarah Brown Wessling. And without further ado, Sarah, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you so much. You know, introductions are lovely and so awkward to be the recipient of. So thank you so much for all of those kind words. I have to tell you all, it is an absolute pleasure to be able to spend some time with all of you today. What a special group of educators that have come together today. And I am especially, when I was listening to both Suzanne and Steve, I heard them say a couple of things that really resonated with me and I think are just wonderful frames of reference for the next hour that we're going to spend together. So I will tell you first and foremost that I come to everything as a teacher. So the next hour is not going to be me talking at you for the whole time because, like Suzanne said, this time is about getting K-12 and higher ed to talk to each other. So I'm going to make sure that we have some time for you all to be able to have conversation with each other. And like Steve said, the importance of seeing and identifying and nurturing the people who are going to be our colleagues in this profession is just so critical. And so being able to use some time this morning to reflect on that is also really, really important. I also wanted to just say that I feel like I have been in this conversation from lots of different vantage points. So as a classroom teacher, as a person who started a teaching academy in my own school district, which is a program to target high school students and find ways to get them into the classroom. And then I've also worked at the university and I've worked in methods classes and with pre-service teachers at the university. So I feel like I have had the benefit of being in this conversation from lots of different vantage points. And I hope that as we spend this next hour together, that it's those frames of reference that'll be really, really beneficial. Well, so thank you for taking a minute just to jump in that chat window. And it's also good, right? It's also good to start kind of interacting in easier ways before I put you eventually into some breakout rooms and ask you to do some talking to each other. So I really wanted to start today with thinking about really this work in front of us. In terms of the spaces that we create. So I'm going to start a little bit general, and then we're going to work our way to specific, and then we're going to kind of come back out again. I always call this like the peacock feathers, like you go in and out and in and out. But I want to start by thinking about what it means to work in brave spaces. I think that brave spaces certainly are survivor spaces. And I am certain that everyone on this call right now understands what it means to be brave in education right now, in a way that we certainly have not understood that in the past. But I have to tell you, this reminds me a little bit of a class that I have taught. It's called Pushing the Limits. It's an English class. And in this course, one of the things that we do is we look at a couple of essential questions. We look at how do humans push emotional limits, physical limits, cognitive limits. And the first thing that we read in this class is an essay from a man named Aaron Ralston. You might know who this guy is if you've ever seen the movie 127 Hours. I'm not sure if you've seen that movie or not, but if you haven't, so his story, this is a true story. He was a hiker, and he was in Utah, and he fell and literally got trapped between a rock and a hard place, between a wall and then a rock. And so he was stuck there for 127 hours. And the way that he got out of that space was kind of by doing the unthinkable. He had a dull pocket knife, and he severed his own arm in order to get out. And so, of course, I start with a story like this with high schoolers, because they're like, okay, I will read that story. I will talk about that. And the question that they ask, that we ask, could I actually do that? If I were in that situation, if I were in the situation where I had to save myself, could I actually do it? So this got us to do some research. And the research is the part that I think is really interesting for us today as we think about what it means to be a survivor and what it means to be in brave spaces. We went and we found that a man named Al Seibert runs this place called the Resiliency Center. And he's done a lot of research on what it means to be a survivor. So I wanted just to pull a little bit of what my students and I uncovered. First of all, he found that survivors rapidly read reality. Try to say that one fast 5 times in a row. He discovered that getting angry is a waste of precious energy when you're in survival mode. If you get, if you get angry, sometimes that anger just comes out sideways, and it's not really useful. He found the importance of integrated problem solving, that you use your left brain, your right brain, your logical self, your creative self. And he talks about the way survivors take leaps of faith. He also says that survivors have optimism and unflappability. Okay, so I'm going to read a longer quote here, and I'm going to ask you to go back to that chat window and just share, like, what about this quote seems to resonate with you. So this is going to come right from his research. So here we go. Al Seibert says, to be a survivor, it is to be proud and humble, positive and negative, selfish and unselfish, cooperative and rebellious, spiritual and irreverent. Survivors are complex, compassionate, and most important, open-minded. The foremost quality of a survivor is intellectual flexibility. All right, so I'm going to pause, ask you to go to that chat window and add in there what you notice. Definitely, it's that flexibility, right? Over and over. Laura, I agree. That is the real definition of a teacher, for sure. This is what teachers do all of the time. Take what comes at you with an open mind, balance. I like this idea that there's no one trait or idea of a survivor. And that definition that he uses at the end, it kind of functions on differences, right? Left brain, right brain, this and that. So I think that's really, really important. When we think about why you all have gathered and why you're here doing this work, I hope that these qualities also really resonate. When you think about what it's going to mean in order to really address teacher recruitment and retention, it's also going to take all of these things, right? It's going to take brave spaces. It's going to take those survivor qualities. And I think those certainly are really important as we think about next steps. So I want to do a little bit of thinking about what it means to reclaim brave spaces. So I don't know if you feel like this, or I don't know if you feel like you're in a brave space right now. You might feel like you're in a survival space. You might be not sure if you're going to survive, like day to day, given just the craziness of what it means to be an educator right now. But I really do think that we can reclaim our brave spaces if we feel like we're losing touch with them. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to create a compass, a way to move forward. And that happens by remembering where we started. So I'm sure that many of you have been asked the question before, like, why do you teach, right? I have no doubt that that is not a new question. You've answered it many times. And I am going to ask you to do a slightly different version of that today. I'm going to ask you to do some thinking, not just about why you teach, but I want you to go back to the beginning. I'm going to ask you to go way back, right? Pull on that piece of loose yarn and go way back and think about when you decided to become a teacher. So I'm going to start with my origin story. I'm also a huge Marvel fan, so everything in my family seems to come from origin stories. But I'm going to start with my origin story as a teacher. And I don't get to tell this one very often, so I'm really excited to share it with you today. But so first of all, I will say that I don't think I decided to be a teacher. I think it was a realization of something that I must have always known. And when I left high school, I actually decided that I thought I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. I will also tell you, my mom was a fabulous fourth grade teacher. And when I graduated from high school, I didn't really want to be just exactly like my mom. And so I wanted to do something different. And so I think I was like fighting this teaching thing just a little bit. But when I went to college, I went into broadcast journalism, and it did not take very long for me to realize that the writing wasn't quite right for me. I didn't think the camera liked me. And I was like, no, this one is not right. So I changed my major and I went to the philosophy department, and I thought, I want to be a philosopher. And I loved it. And for a semester, I was just, like in the library thinking all the time. And I came home one weekend, and my dad sat me down and he said, Sarah, we need to talk about this. What exactly are you going to do with that philosophy degree? And I couldn't really answer him. So I said, Dad, you're probably right. And at the same time, I was taking a lot of psychology courses. So I thought, I think I would like to go into psychology. So I changed my major for a third time. I get into that. And then I realize I love it, but I don't love the math and science enough to do it for like 7 or 8 more years, right? In the way that I would really want to be able to be a practitioner. So I am walking through campus one day, and there must have been a very bright light on my beautiful campus, because as I was walking, I realized that all of these things I loved, I would never have to give up if I went into a classroom. And it was just kind of like this epiphany moment. And I literally turned around, walked straight to the College of Ed, walked up to this poor woman sitting at a desk answering the phone. And I said, I am going to be a teacher. Who do I talk to? And she was like kind of flustered. And that was the beginning. And that is where my journey started. I also am going to tell you, though, as I was thinking about this story, I realized there's a part of this story that I don't always tell. And there's a part of this story that I sometimes forget. And the part of this story that I don't always tell is I took a gap year between my freshman and sophomore years of college. And during that time, I had a high school teacher, a high school math teacher, who called me up one day and she said, "Hey, I heard you're back home for a while. You need to come to school. You need to come to my classroom. I don't care if you do anything, but you need to come to my classroom. And if you just want to sit in the back, that's okay." And so I did. And after a couple of weeks, I started talking to the students. And then after a couple of more weeks, I started helping the students with math, which is not really my thing. I'm a little bit more words than numbers. And there was an experience, an anchor experience of just being in that space where that woman planted a seed for me that let me see myself in a classroom. So even though it took another year and a half, almost 2 years for me to really embrace that early experience, what I want to say is that nothing replaces the opportunity for our future teachers to actually be in classrooms, right? To see themselves in classrooms. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you into some small groups, and I am going to ask you to share your origin stories. So I want you to think back to, was it a realization? Was it a decision? Was there someone who said something to you? Was there an experience that pushed you into this profession, or were you pulled into this profession? Okay, I think we're all back now. All right, so I just want to start. I'm curious, how did it go? Did you like the stories? Did you not like the stories? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up. Yeah, good. So what did you hear? And you can either put this in the chat window or you can unmute and talk. That's totally fine too. This is not such a massive group that it would feel, really strange to do that. But I'm really curious about if there were any similarities in the stories that you heard. And I'm just also curious about any unique things that you heard that would be good for the group.
I think in our group, hi, it's Teresa. In our group, there were several people who came to the position of teaching as a second career, that they actually had started in different directions and then somehow they were pulled into this field. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think most of us mentioned that initially we may not have been education majors. And we just had this, this epiphany, this realization that maybe we needed to move in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Teresa.
I was also in Teresa's group, and I think another thing for 3 of the 4 of us was a family connection to education. In that 2 of the people in our group, they have children who are teachers, and myself, I had a parent who was a teacher.
Absolutely.
Just to magnify that, my daughter is actually in this conference with us.
Oh, that's like snap worthy right there. That's super cool. Kathy, did I see that you unmuted?
I was the one that said about the conference.
Oh, you did. Okay, I got you.
I think there was also a theme about people reaching out and tapping people on the shoulder to say, hey, you'd make a great teacher someday.
Yep.
Being inspired by a teacher, so going into a classroom, either visiting a teacher or having a teacher from the past that was truly inspirational, whether it was a passion for the content that he or she taught, or even personally inspirational.
Yep. Absolutely. Anybody else want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in. Then we also have those of us who started when we were in kindergarten or first grade, playing school every day in our basements, being completely obsessed with wanting to have worksheets and grading them and all that stuff. And we talked a little bit about how much what we thought we were going to be doing as teachers has actually evolved, and how now in my 15th year, I'm not the one at the front of the room. I'm not the one leading every single class, and how different it looks from when I was a little girl thinking this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I love how it is now, by the way.
For sure.
And can I just comment on what she just said? In our group, I had brought up that I used to play school all the time, and the worksheets were everything. Making the worksheet, giving it to my little sister to complete the worksheet. But then also something that, and I apologize, I didn't catch the person's name. What they just said, what we thought school was going to be like versus what it is. I think it's really important to recognize how it's always ongoing, and what students might be learning now. Some of us teach tomorrow's teacher and things of that nature. It continues to evolve, and whatever we're doing today might not necessarily be what they're going to do in 4 years from now. And so I always emphasize, like, this is what we're doing today. These are the standards, and it's always changing.
Absolutely.
Well, the one thing that didn't change is the grading. I remember my second grade teacher used to let me stay in from recess and grade everybody's math workbooks. So, and that's something I don't like doing now, but it's still definitely a part of the job.
I heard you use the phrase, "let me grade."
I'm sure she was very happy that somebody else was going to do all that for her. Yes.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So here's why I think this exercise and this conversation is so important. The task, the challenge in front of all of you, in front of all of us, I know it's complex. I know that we have to approach it from many different vantage points. There is not, a magic answer in terms of how do we recruit and retain. But what just happened is a whole lot of wisdom. There's a lot that we already know about what it means to recruit teachers from our own experiences. So I heard things like, building on family connections that already exist. I heard tapping someone on the shoulder, saying it out loud, right? You would be a great teacher. Being in classroom spaces with inspiring teachers, with, people. I mean, and you know this, right? I'm sure that you have had students that have come to you and they have said, I wanted to be a teacher because I was in your classroom. Maybe you had a daughter, Kathy, right? Who said, I wanted to be a teacher because I saw what you do. I think the second career teachers are so important to this profession, to be honest with you, in a way that we don't always talk about, because I think what second career teachers bring is oftentimes a lot of content knowledge that they then are able to repurpose in really, really creative and innovative ways. So I'm hearing, all of these ways of thinking about what it means to recruit and retain. And I don't want to trivialize how complex this issue is, but I also don't want to overlook the wisdom that you already have, right? I don't want you to forget that the way that we recruit people is truly one person at a time. That's really how it is. I mean, have any of you ever had to go to a party and then you call somebody ahead of time and then you say, hey, what time are you going to be there? Do you want to walk in together? You might even ask them what they're going to wear before you get there, right? Nobody wants to go into a party alone. So if we think that we can recruit a teaching profession without taking someone's hand and bringing them with us, we're probably overlooking some really important everyday wisdom. I think one of the things that can be really beneficial is affirmations, and the way that we think about affirmations. I had a student a couple of years ago, and his name was Peyton. And although Peyton did not end up going into the teaching profession, I do think his story is really important when we think about the necessity of affirmations, when we think about the necessity of saying out loud to people, this is what I see in you. All right, so here's Peyton's story. Here's what happened. So Peyton is in my classroom, and he had moved into our school district that fall. I teach in Des Moines, Iowa. He had just moved from Atlanta, and he was having a rough semester. He was having a really rough semester. He's one of these students that, do you know the ones that like take over the whole classroom? Like they want to make sure everybody knows that they're right there. So that was Peyton for me. And he also had this habit of trying to make friends by being mean to people. Have you ever had students who've done that? They try to make friends by being mean to people. So Peyton had this habit of just making these jokes about other students that were not horrible, but they weren't okay. And, you know, we talk about it, and there were all of these things that we had tried. And at the same time that we were working through this, our school had instituted a call a foul policy. So you could, like, a student could stand up in class and say, like, I call a foul. And so one day, a student said, Peyton, I'm just going to call a foul on you. And he stood up and he does the sign, I'm going to call a foul on you. And so I said, all right, Peyton, you know what this means? Like, you need to make amends. And that's kind of how I would talk about it in my classroom. I think a lot about amends as a parent and as a teacher. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, you need to tell him something positive. You need to say, you know, you said something that was hurtful, so now you need to say something meaningful that's positive. And he tries to say something, he makes a joke, he says something about his shoes, and like it's not really meaningful at all. So I realized this is going to take over the class. So I give him a Post-it note. And I said, all right, Peyton, just write it down on the Post-it note. So he does, and it's not any better. And I realize, as this is unfolding, I realize Peyton has no idea what an affirmation is. So I said to him, I said, Peyton, do you know what an affirmation is? Do you know what it would like sound like to give one to someone? Or do you know what it would look like to see it on a piece of paper? And he said, well, no, I don't really know. And I said, oh, you know, this one is my fault. This one is on me. So I said, let me teach you what one is. So I had the class get quiet. I got 2 chairs and put them kind of knee to knee in the front of the classroom. And I said, Peyton, this is what an affirmation is. And I said, you know, Peyton, when I look at you, I see somebody who never gives up. I see somebody who's had to work really, really hard at surviving. And I see someone who is incredibly smart and someone who has not even begun to realize all of the potential that he has. And I just looked at him and I told him this, and he got really quiet. And he didn't say anything, and he still had this Post-it note beside him. And so he wrote down an actual affirmation for this student. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. You did it. That's awesome. So we kind of continue on with the class, and I notice he's still writing. And by the end of class, he gets up and he starts walking around, and he has a Post-it note, and he has written an amends, an affirmation for every single student in the classroom. And I think that what this story reminds me of is how incredibly important it is to say out loud what we see in people, right? And what we see in our students, what we see in our colleagues. When we say it out loud, it matters. So I just want you to think a little bit about that, a little bit about, again, just how important those affirmations really are. I was thinking a little bit about some of the pathways to the profession. And again, this is some everyday wisdom, right? So these are some of the things that you uncovered in your conversation. And I think some ways for us to build on that. So first of all, do we say it out loud? You would be a fantastic teacher. And then do we say, you would be a fantastic teacher because you would be a fantastic teacher because you are so good at listening to other people. You would be a fantastic teacher because you can find a way to always get your group to work really hard. I don't know how you do that, but that is something really good teachers do, and you can do it. So one of my challenges to all of you is to think about, what are we saying out loud? And are we just saying you would be a good teacher, or are we saying you would be a good teacher because? I also am wondering about the ways in which we open up classrooms. So yeah, are there opportunities for high schools, for middle schools, for elementary schools to partner with our higher ed? And I know that these things happen, right? But I think it's a constant way of thinking about it. And is there an opportunity for students to get into schools with lower stakes, right? You know, maybe they don't have to be taking a class for credit in order to do it. Maybe there is a way to think about those partnerships. But I really, really believe that opening up those classrooms and making sure that students have the opportunities, like what you just said, you know, being inspired by a teacher, it goes a long way in recruiting teachers. This one is a little more tricky, but I think it's a question we have to be asking, and I think this is big systematic stuff. But are we looking for ways to make student teaching a paid internship? I think we have to be asking this question. I do not claim to have any magic or pixie dust whatsoever. But we do know without a doubt that this is one of the reasons that people cannot go into teaching. And it's absolutely one of the reasons that people who might want to be teachers, but would not be able to afford an unpaid semester of college, it can absolutely deter them from coming into the profession. I'm curious about how often K-12 and higher ed are working in isolation or reaching out. And I think, you know, reaching out does not have to be, I'm reaching out with a plan. It can be, I would just like to talk to you about this. I want to pick your brain. I'm curious about what you see. I'm curious about what you notice. Those kinds of questions are really the questions that I think start the work. And finally, do we try more than once or twice? So do we say you'd be a fantastic teacher because once, or do we say it 5 times? Do we open up classrooms once, or do we open it up 5 times? So, because a lot of times it's a seed, right? It's something that takes many iterations in order for us to really get to the point where we are seeing how crucial this is. I was thinking about systems being brave, and certainly brave systems would be ones that would be asking some of those big systematic questions. But I also wanted to share with you the importance of just the collaboration, right? And the way that K-12, higher ed can work together. Susan Scott, who wrote a book called Fierce Conversations, says that our most valuable currency is the relationship. And I know this is something we all know, like I know we know this, but living it is different, right? So when I think about what Susan Scott says, what I really think about is like the conversation is the relationship. So if you think about the kinds of conversations you have with people, you think about the kinds of conversations you have with your colleagues, or the folks within this community, the kinds of conversations you have define the relationship you have with each other. So if the conversation is transactional, then that's what kind of a relationship you have. If the conversation is curious and exploratory, then that's the kind of relationship that you have. If the conversation is vulnerable, then that's the kind of relationship that you're going to build. You're going to build trust from that space. So I think it's important to ask, right? What kinds of conversations are we having? And, you know, the way in which we talk will define the relationship we have, and truly, you know, our ability to work on this, to chip away at this problem. One of the graduate classes that I teach, I use this book. It's called Community by Peter Block. And I pulled a couple of questions I love it. It's not for educators, but it absolutely is for educators, you know, one of those reads. And in this book, he asks some big questions. And he offers some questions that are important when we want to start tough conversations. So I just wanted to share a few of these with you. And I'm hopeful that one or more of these questions will resonate and you'll think, you know, I'm going to write that question down because I'm going to do a little thinking and I'm going to reach out to someone and I'm going to use this question as a way to begin. So here are some of the questions. When we are having tough conversations. So first of all, what is the crossroads that you are faced with at this point in time? He also asks, he says, we have to ask, how valuable of an experience do you plan for this to be? So if you are going to do some collaborating, you know, it's easy to jump in with the logistics. This is how many students, this is the places, this is the time. But it's also really crucial to ask yourself, how valuable do we want this experience to be and what would make it valuable? We have to ask how much risk we are willing to take. And risk can look really different, right? So risk could be working with someone new. Risk could be being vulnerable. Risk could be sharing. Risk could be setting a boundary, right? All of those things can be risks. And I think that they're really important as we think about this work. This question always gets me when I have to ask myself this question: what have I done to contribute to the very thing I want to change? And this one gets me because I know that on some level we are all in this space, right? That we all want to make sure that we have enough teachers to sustain this profession. And I think we all have to ask ourselves this question, you know, what have I done to contribute to this? What is the promise I'm willing to make that constitutes a major shift or risk for me? And I think that one's also really crucial. All right, I've been talking a long time, so I'm going to pause for just a moment because I've given you a lot to think about. Affirmations, some pathways to the profession, some of these tough conversations. And before we kind of pull all of this together, I'm going to pause, let you go to the chat window, and you can do one of three things. You can either push back on something I've said. You can totally do that. I'm always up for that. You can ask a question of me or just in general. It can be kind of a rhetorical question. You can also make a connection if there's something that you've heard that makes you think about something you're already doing. Or you also could react and you might say, you know, I hadn't really thought of that. And maybe it's more of a commitment that shows up in the chat window. This is one thing that I think I'm going to try. All right, so we're going to pause for just a moment here. I'm going to let you go to that chat window. And fantastic insights over here. I hope you're taking a minute to read through the contributions in the chat window. And, you know, as I'm looking at them, honestly, what I really see are commitments. And and once again, not to trivialize this, but recruitment is going to happen one person at a time, right? That's really what's going to happen, one person at a time. And that's what I see. I see in your, contributions in the chat window, the ways that you're really thinking about that. So I will be sure to leave a few minutes at the end to take a couple of questions or kind of open it up for conversation. But I do want to end with one more anecdote that I think is really important for us to think about when it comes to retaining teachers. So hang on here. There we go. When it comes to retaining teachers, I think we have to have anchors for our young professionals and for our new professionals, and making sure that we help our newest colleagues understand that this work is not about comparison, it's about collaboration. And I do think a lot of our new colleagues, our young new colleagues, are growing up in an age of comparison. I mean, we all are, right? But they are especially, coming to this profession in an age of comparison where they see, influencers on social media and they make teaching look perfect all of the time. And I think so many of them end up sitting with that like intensity. And we have to be able to reach out to them. When I think about my teaching story, I think about one of the most critical moments in my teaching story, and it was really early in my career. And I will say, before I jump into that, that at the heart of all of this is human work, right? More than anything else, what we do day to day is human work. And even if you are not in a traditional classroom, that doesn't mean that you aren't a teacher. It doesn't mean that you are apart from or absolved from that human work. So when I was early in my career, I'm going to just tell you, my first year of teaching was actually kind of awesome. You know how they always say the first year is going to be really, really hard? It wasn't. It was just, I had a wonderful mentor. It was really fantastic. My brain was really fuzzy all the time. But other than that, it was a great first year. My second year of teaching was the first year at the school that I had taught at for 22 years. And that year about did me in. So at the end of the first semester, it was tough. It was just nothing went well. Everything felt just difficult, and it just, nothing seemed to work. And I remember going home for winter break, and I remember a conversation with my dad. And I sat down next to him and I said, Dad, this is of course, like the same person who told me that philosophy wasn't going to be a good career. I said, Dad, I think I got it wrong. I said, I don't actually think I'm supposed to be a teacher. I said, I just can't figure this one out. And he looked at me really gently and he said, well, honey, you signed a contract, so you're going to have to at least finish this year. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I am going to have to finish this year. And so I took a little bit of time to do some reflection, and I went, and my school district does winter break and then 2 weeks to finish out the semester before we, start over again. And so I go back for these 2 weeks before the end of the semester, and I had remembered that I promised myself when I was student teaching, because I started to do this when I was student teaching, and I promised myself that I was always have my students evaluate me at the end of the course or at the end of the semester. And I've been doing this for a couple of years, and I thought, well, even though this might be rough, you need to do it again. So I have my students, evaluate me, and I give them 3 directions. And this is like after their final exam, I give them 3 directions on this evaluation. 1, please tell me the truth. 2, you don't have to put your name on this. And 3, I promise not to look at these until I turn in your grades. And for the first time all semester, they actually listened to me. They did all 3 of those things. They were honest. They, they shared some really important feedback. So I get all my grades in and I'm sitting in my classroom and I'm getting ready to read these evaluations. Okay, so I also have to tell you that year I was sharing a classroom with another teacher and she was like, oh, like she was also a first-year teacher at the school. And she was like wildly popular, beautiful, charismatic, like at Christmas, like her desk was covered with gifts and like I'm just staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning writing these really thoughtful responses to their papers that they throw in the garbage as soon as they see the grade, and she's like getting invited to slumber parties. I don't really want to go to any slumber parties, but I clearly know the difference between how she is connecting with students and how I am connecting with students. And so, okay, so you have to know this. So I'm sitting there at my desk and I start to read these evaluations and they're honest, but they're really, really tough, right? They're like just really tough to read. And so I start to cry. And as I'm sitting there crying, I realize I cannot let this other woman see me so upset about this. So I do the only thing that I can think of. I crawl under my desk, which was not a great idea, but that's what I did. So then I am under my desk and I'm like just sitting there, because then nobody can see me crying. And I realize, well, now what am I going to do? So at the time there was an actual phone, right? Like not a cell phone, but an actual phone with a cord on the wall. And I grab the phone and I call the most amazing teacher that I have ever known, my mom, who was a 4th grade teacher for 30 years. And while I sat there on the floor underneath the desk, we had a really good conversation. And at the end of that conversation, she said something and she meant it quite literally, but I've always looked at this moment as the moment when I knew I was really going to be a teacher. She says to me at the end of this conversation, she says, so honey, are you going to get out from under the desk? And I will tell you, when I said yes to my mom, I said yes to being a teacher, because this is what teachers do, right? Teachers get out from under the desk over and over and over again. And I think about that and I think about how incredibly fortunate I was to have this anchor, to have this person that I could reach out to and didn't judge me and just asked if I was going to get out from under the desk, because that's where retention comes from. If I hadn't have had that, if I just would have been in comparison to this woman sitting next to me, I don't know if I still would be teaching. I'm not sure. It was a really bad year. And so I also tell you this because I know that so often you all do not hear thank you enough. So I hope that today, at least you can hear from my space here in Des Moines, Iowa, just my incredible appreciation and gratitude for all of the work that you do, and just the impact that you all make on students and on this profession over and over again.